things like to a person like, you're ugly, your hair doesn't look good, I don't like the way you do that, you're not good at this, you stink at this. I look in the dictionary and I see ugly, I see you're ugly, and they just keep going and going and going over and over again to the point where somebody internalizes that. And they might say to themselves, well, I like to do this, but I'm not really good at that. I want to go to this event, but I may not be pretty enough. Or they begin to internalize that. So a huge effect, and that affects people over time because it begins to happen, and it happens subtly. Sometimes it happens in a more intense way, but over time, somebody can just constantly keep doing these little things until they break you down and you don't even know that you're broken. That's coercive emotional control. Jealousy. Raise your hand if you've ever met anybody who's jealous. Everybody should have their hands up. Probably the person next to you. Anyway, but it happens. So somebody's trying to get something that you have. They want something that you have. The sad thing is in relationships, it's a huge challenge sometimes. That partner is doing better than you are. You would think they would want to work as a team. But for some reason, there's like an imbalance of power, and people are in competition, going back and forth, trying to defeat each other, trying to do better than that partner. Maybe it is to maintain the money, to be the breadwinner in the home, but huge conflict that exists because of this coercive emotional control that some people try to gain in a relationship. So these are 3 forms of control that are ignored in the mutual violent combat models that exist. So if somebody says this person is controlling, it doesn't have to be coercive control. Depending on the context, depending on the situation, people can use very different, distinct forms of control. So we can't sit there and say, oh, the control is the same. You know what? Situational control and coercive emotional control, they're not the same, and they have very different implications for interventions and for helping people. Very different implications for how you get somebody to be successful and to move forward in society and to kind of forget about some of those, negative experiences. Remember we heard about that a little bit earlier. How do you displace some of those negative feelings and move on and move forward? Well, we have to understand how control is exercised in a relationship, and we fall short with research. So here's some findings from my research. Successful performance of control is not similar or common when looking at studies of mutual violent combat. So women and men are controlling each other for very distinct reasons in a relationship, and in order to understand that and to get them to engage in a dialogue about what's happening, you have to understand how those different forms of control impact each person in the relationship. That's something where we're missing that. Next, severity of physical violence was implemented actually mutually. Both these men and women were really giving each other a run for their money in my study. But using different forms of violence. Women were more likely to kick each other or to kick their partners or to use objects to hurt them. They weren't really relying on their physical strength to hurt. They were using other things that would allow them to actually injure their partners. So that was also very interesting. Are you using the objects around you? Are you using your body in order to perpetrate violence? That's very interesting because context matters. What types of circumstances are you in? What are you keeping yourself around? What types of people are you keeping yourself around? All these things are very important for intimate partner violence. Next, emotional injury was consistent. And that's very interesting. You think back, you look back at those typologies, why are women actually, being perceived of as being criminals? And as women become more liberated in society, they earn a voice. You earn a voice. And some women in these studies who were perpetrating intimate partner violence were as likely to say what they needed to say in any given moment to those partners, understanding that they might be hurt or injured when they said whatever it was. But they were more likely to say it even though they knew a beating could come after that, whatever that message was. So there were greater consequences for women. Those women who stood up and said something, they were more likely to experience physical injury. But I noticed in the study that longitudinally, over time, these women said, I don't care if you hit me. All I have is my voice. I'm going to use my voice and I'm going to at least say what I have to say. Whereas some others who had experienced some childhood violence, they picked and chose their battles. They were likely to say, look, when I said this to my father, this is what happened. So I'm not going to say that to him because I know what the outcome can be, and I'm not silly, right? Conditioning. And that's very important. And we're missing the bus on that. We're not understanding that some people have been conditioned over time to interact or behave in a certain way. And that you can't just look at, oh, let's just talk about the partner violence. Let's talk about what's happening in my relationship right now. No, you really have to look at things over time and understand how those things work. Next, can IPV, intimate partner violence, be performed mutually? Can that happen? Can it actually happen? So here are 4 things that we need to take into consideration before we say, oh, it is actually possible to even have mutually performed intimate partner violence. Because remember what I told you, if you're looking at different types of control and control is performed differently, will it ever be mutual in a study on mutual partner violence? So you don't see lots of studies at all on mutual partner violence. You see more studies on situational violence. You see more studies about conflict when you have 2 people hitting, because the researchers haven't really been able to touch or feel that because they hit so many bumps. And I'm going to explain to you why they get those bumps. First, performance. Context. The context of violence. Some people want to say, I want to look at just women who have been, involved in intimate partner violence. Well, if you're going to just assess them, you have to look at things like, what community did they grow up in? Right? What types of jobs do they have? You have to look at the context. And some studies on mutual partner violence, they totally ignore the context and they just start talking to men and women about what's happening. And you would think, that people would really take into consideration context. But in a lot of studies, they just say, let's look at gender. We're going to explore gender, And when you explore gender, we say, oh, there's a limitation to this study, Half of these people were in a homeless shelter, and the other half of the people were just walking down the street headed in Walmart, And they don't take into consideration what those experiences are and what the context is. Next, motivations. Why did you hit your partner? Now, when they use the typologies, when they say you have violent resistance, situational couple violence, mutual violent combat, and intimate terrorism, that, in fact, defines the motivation. So in most studies on intimate partner violence, they have a 4-type typology. And they say, oh, this is the reason why they hit. They hit because they were a battered woman. They hit because it was situational conflict. They hit because they were coercive and controlling and aggressive. Or they hit because they were trying to fully control their partner. That's the motivation. That's it. That's all they say in the studies on intimate partner violence. Some couple researchers came up with this typology, and people took it and ran with it. And forever until today, they will say that these are the motivations. These are the 4 motivations that we clump people in categories for, and this is why people hit. Clumping people in categories sounds sort of like race relations, doesn't it? Throwing people in a box and saying everybody in this box is the same. But one of these things is doing his own thing. One of these things is not like us. So we'll just take them out of the study, right? Is that what people do? Okay, so next, executing control. We talked about that. But the key factor is, do you want to control, but you're not able to? Now, people don't look at that. Somebody may want to control their partner, but they can't actually get their partner to budge. So they become more and more aggressive and violent over time. That was a key finding from my research, that women who were unable to control their partners became more and more physically violent over time. Oh, you want to keep going out all night? I'm going to wait right by the club, in the car, and as soon as you come out, I'm going to run you over. One woman in the study, she said, okay, he wants to keep cheating, so I'm going to take bleach, and I'm going to pour it in the saltwater fish tank as soon as he comes in, and we're just going to watch all the little fish jump out of the tank, one at a time. Plop, plop, plop. He spends hours and hours of his time with this saltwater fish tank. Thousands of dollars, and all the fish are popping out. Plop. And she's just sitting there. Gotcha, right? Assessment. We need to carefully assess the previous violent conduct. Is the person who's hitting in this violent relationship likely to beat up the secretary at work? You know, is there some consistency across lifetime behavior? Or is it triggered by the actual relationship? This is something that is very, very important. Now remember, my study of intimate partner violence is looking at a very unique population of people. But it's a population that we need to be very, very mindful, because when you look at our college campuses, they're telling us the statistics that women are 115% more likely to attack their male partners than it goes the other way, right? So our women are actually becoming more aggressive, or we're more likely to pay attention to it, or they're more likely to get in trouble for it, or, you know. But it's something that we need to take into consideration, because women are being abused every single day, but we can't forget that something else is happening simultaneously. Because if we ignore it, as we've done over time, we'll see all these women locked up in these corrections facilities, and we won't have any programs to address them. Because we have to look at the full picture. We don't want to redefine the situation. We want to understand that domestic violence has many different faces, many different circumstances that impact people, and we need to be able to look at a full picture and figure out how much money do we need to support this initiative. What do we need to do in order to make sure that this population of people are actually addressed? I came up with a theory. Sociology of emotions theory. Now, sociology of emotions theory is a macro-level and micro-level theory that typically has been used to look at how space and how an organization and the organizational culture can impact how you act and how you respond in a particular setting. So, you know, you all go to school, and when you walk into the school, there's a certain way that you should dress, you know. There's a certain way that you should actually behave, and the culture of that organization will shape who you are and what you do in that particular setting. So I thought it would be a great idea to apply this to circumstances of domestic violence and to interview women to see if, in fact, different cultural contexts actually shaped their motivations to hit their partners. And unbelievably, what did I find? I found that Johnson's typology of intimate partner violence did not at all explain women's motivations for violence. Not at all. What instead explained their motivations to hit were the cultural contexts that they grew up in, and then the relationship, and looking at the intimate relationship between the culture and also the relationship that they were in. And that actually explained why women would hit in a particular situation. So on a micro level, we looked at specific words and images and actually people, because people impact you. I talk to my students sometimes about two different types of culture. You've got culture that you receive through your family and through your immediate relationships, but then you have this kind of integrated culture. When you're outside of your home and you interact with different people and you learn things through the media, through society, you understand? So actually, how they feel and how they respond to the people around them would actually impact whether they're going to hit or not. Now, this should make sense. You know, this should make sense, but this is not the theoretical framework that is currently being used to assess intimate partner violence. They're looking at the typology. And whether aggression and control together explain why people hit. Also here, and we heard about self a lot today, right? Interpretations of self. You know, what do you think of yourself? How do you feel about yourself? That's really important in the study of domestic violence. Do you have something to lose? Do you love yourself? The first thing people work on in relationships, well, how can you love somebody else if you don't actually love yourself? Why would you want to protect another person? You know, why wouldn't you want to hit another person back if you're okay with somebody hitting you? If you're willing to fight and hit, you might be more likely to, you know, be involved in a situation where you may be, you know, where somebody might strike you. But these are different things to think about, you understand? And variations depending upon the culture. You know, so you can't look and say, well, this is one person, and everybody in this particular culture is going to respond a certain way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that a woman who is abused as a child may look at that situation and rank and weigh that when they decide what they want to do. So in a hostile situation, someone who experiences violence in the family, they may actually decide that they're going to beat this person up. This is what happened in my study. This woman said, I watched somebody beat my mother, and I will never let anybody do that to me. I will never let anybody do that to me. And another person in a study, she was molested and abused as a child, and she said, I didn't have a problem with him, raping me. I didn't have a problem with, the physical violence, but I had a problem with the verbal abuse. I didn't like the way he talked to me. And when he disrespected me in public, you understand, that is when I wanted to fight. So for so long in her life, she had experienced victimization and physical abuse that it became a norm. But she hadn't experienced that verbal abuse. She was molested silently. Silently. There weren't any words, but her body was misused, and that became a norm for her. So that's how you would understand the relationship between that micro-level relationship that she has with the partner and the people around, and then that cultural context, that macro-level context, and how those come together, the play that you see between those indicators, and understanding what her true motivations were for hitting somebody or for being in a relationship that was violent. So keep in mind, this theory, sociology of emotions, it works whether you're talking about somebody who's a battered person or someone who's using situational violence or mutual violence or even intimate terrorism. This is a gender-neutral model. It works for homosexual couples, heterosexual couples, right? That's what we need. That's what we need, right? People can be hit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their sexual preferences are, right? They can be in a violent relationship. But why don't our theories reflect what's going on in society? Well, because maybe we're stuck in some... Yeah. All right. Just a few things to throw out for you, a few costs. Moved on. The cost of intimate partner violence against women exceeds $5.8 billion. These costs include nearly $4.1 billion in indirect costs of Medicare and mental health care, nearly $1.8 billion in indirect costs for loss of productivity and present value of lifetime earnings. Intimate partner violence causes women to lose about $727 million in wages from approximately 8 million days of missed work. So there are lots of different treatment options that exist. I'll connect them really quickly. The LaRouche treatment model and Duluth models are typically used for battered women. The couple therapy programs are typically used to bring different couples together, but the focus is typically on male behavior. Lots of studies where we're going to focus on coercion and getting our male partners to respect women and to understand how to interact and communicate, strong communication models, but still focused on either Duluth, battered women, or then coercion by men. And you see some situational couple violent theories, you see some programs that are focusing on women's behavior, but if you look at the literature, typically they're trying to address men who are violent against women. I believe all of these programs are effective, but they typically focus on a particular population, whereas the cognitive behavioral therapy can look comprehensively, can address post-traumatic stress disorder, can address drug use, all these other indicators that tend to be related to reasons why people hit and to their particular circumstances. So I introduce two types of treatment. First, you have reactive IPV treatment or intervention. Now, reactive relates to that person who is actually responding to a more hostile or violent person. So these are the types of treatment that we might find that could be useful over time, not just in the moment, but taking into consideration cultural factors as well as that relationship. Now, here are some key emotive responses that we see related to reactive abuse. So some men or women who are involved in domestic violence where they are responding to another person, they may experience intimidation or silent abuse. That's when you try to shut somebody up and you don't allow them to communicate or interact. Shame, trust, or passive behavior, helplessness or hopelessness, and dependency and anxiety. So those are some core emotive responses that we can address in order to really help people move beyond, get rid of some of the negative experiences and behaviors and then translate those into positive experiences, ways to help them to move forward. Last, you have the more proactive intervention. Now, proactive interventions, those are going to be those interventions for people who are engaging in mutual violent combat or the intimate terrorist type combat. All right, that means that they're trying to control, they're trying to hurt and abuse each other. And here are some of the interventions. Typically, you see some form of trauma and tension. You see anger, jealousy strikes, and then guilt and confusion. So these are some of the things that we might want to do in order to address those situations. I have a handout here for you. It looks sort of like this. There are a couple core studies that I've done, and the handout gives you an overview of those studies and also a link to a website, www.choward-bostic.com, where you can go to that